would like to thank our volunteers, our team to make it happen. We also like to thank Morgan Stanley, BizLink, and some of our supporters. Okay, so without delay, let me first introduce our first speaker, Gray Nearing, Senior Research Scientist at Google. Gray is working on the flood forecasting, and he holds a Ph.D. in hydrology from University of Arizona and was previously a faculty member in geology and earth science at the University of Alabama and at University of California at Davis. Let's welcome Gray Nearing.
Awesome, thanks. And thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really happy to talk about what we do every day. I love talking about it. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and the slides are really less important than getting the message out. And by that, I don't mean the message that I want to give. I mean answering any questions you might have. So what I mean is stop me and interrupt anytime. I would much rather have a discussion than just sit here and give a university lecture. So please do interrupt me. Do we have the slides? Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to, I think I was introduced just now, but I do want to give a small background on who I am, just so that you kind of understand the perspective that I'm bringing. I'm an academic, not in the business world at all. I work in Google Research, and I have no experience in my entire, I'm 40-something years old, and I have no experience in business in my entire life. So my entire life is in academia and research. I approach problems from that perspective, and I was, let's say, like poached by Google out of my faculty position at the University of California, Davis to come work in research at Google Research. And my background is also not in AI or computer science. All of those are things that I've learned along the way. My background is in earth science and climate science. So I come to this sort of forum. I'm a little bit on the outside of the kinds of ways that a lot of people think about problems. I think about problems from the perspective of how do we solve climate, how do we think about climate problems and publish papers in academic journals. That's kind of the perspective that I have. That being said, I have quite a few thoughts on the role of the sort of the various synergistic roles of academia, government, and industry. I work a lot with the United Nations and with the United States government. And I work a lot with academia, and I work a little bit with other industry partners, but mostly in the public space. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we created. This is kind of why I think I'm here. This is the Google Flood Hub. What this is a flood forecast. You can go there, g.co/flood hub. You can get a 7-day flood forecast for the whole world. And it just tells you what we think are going to be the places. I've grabbed this screenshot from yesterday morning. So yesterday morning, the places in red, orange, and yellow are places that we think are at risk of flooding in the next 7 days. And this is one of the busiest maps I've ever seen. It is absolutely flood season in the world right now. And in fact, the floods that are in central west sub-Saharan Africa have kind of, over the last week, have kind of moved from Ethiopia, Somalia, and moved kind of across the continent, and they're causing huge problems in Africa right now. What you're seeing in Vietnam, in northern Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, that's a hurricane, that's the remnants from a hurricane. And we have some colleagues that work with the Vietnamese government, and they had to cancel all our meetings this week because they're in a crisis mode dealing with these hurricane remnants. Okay, oh yeah, and then up in Central Europe, this was from yesterday, but just today, everybody in Austria got alerts from the Austrian government about the flooding that's happening in Austria, which is not record flooding, but it's pretty bad. Okay, next. Oh, yeah, so the last thing I want to say is you can go here anytime. It's free. You don't have to register. You don't have to put your email address in. Just type it in your browser, and you can get the forecasts. They're not as high quality as the forecasts that you get from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States, which are also free, but this is global instead of just in the United States. Okay. Oh, by the way, if you notice there were some countries that are not on here, these are countries that have asked us or that we're legally not allowed to provide flood forecasts for. So the countries that are missing here are because the governments do not allow us to issue this kind of information for those countries. Okay, next slide. Okay. So you can zoom in on any one of those hexagons, and those hexagons are places where we have geolocation points. You can click on one of the points and you can get this, we call it it's called a hydrograph. That's a time series of the level of the water in a river over a period of days. It changes from a solid line in the past to a dotted line in the future, and it goes out 7 days into the future. You can kind of see, okay, it's above the warning level, it's above the danger level, and this is how it looks like sort of as a time series trajectory over the last few weeks. Warning and danger levels are based on probability distributions over historical events. We're going to skip over all of that, but they're basically just markers so you can kind of understand if the water level that you're seeing is unusual or not, basically. Next slide. In some countries, we're allowed or even asked in some cases to provide alerts directly to people. So I don't know, has anyone here received a flood warning from NOAA on their cell phone? It beeps without this really annoying beep without you doing anything, and you can't like ask to not have it. Who here has received one of those? Wow, I'm really surprised. So I've received maybe like 3 in my life. It's not that common, but it does happen, and hopefully you don't get one, but it's like a beep, beep, and that's what happens in the United States. In a lot of countries, obviously, they don't have that capability, and so we can do that. So because we can do that for Android phones, and we can also offer certain types of alerts that other operating systems can choose to use or not choose to use if they want. And this is what happens if you go on Google search. You say, is there a flood near me? This is what happens if you go on Google Maps, and you can see that we have some alerts for floods that pop up unrequested in certain places. And then also, if you're in one of these countries where the government either allows or has asked us to do push notifications, you'll get this push notification to your cell phone, basically. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to talk about that's my obligation to Google, telling you about the product. Go use it; it's free. We don't make any money, but it is a product. So that's not what I'm personally interested in. What I personally want to talk about is the intersection of AI and climate science. So we're going to talk about this from sort of an academic problem-solving research perspective. So let's start with the problem. The problem is, okay, another Google slide, I lied. We're going to frame the problem from Google's perspective. The problem is that people come to Google, people need information about floods. For Google, this looks from our perspective like people coming to Google for information about floods, and it's about 1 billion people a year come to Google in one way or another requesting information about floods. A lot of that is not actually people typing in the browser, is it flooding near me, or is it flooding in Sacramento, or whatever. A lot of it is people going to Google Maps and looking at a map area where we should be telling them that there's a flood. So it's not always a direct request, but if you count all of those things together, this is our more marketing for us to send up our management chain at Google to tell them that our project's important, but if you count all those people together, it's about 1 billion people a year. Okay, next slide. And if you look at the big global picture, floods are the most common natural disaster in the world, right? So weather-related natural disaster. The most common disaster in the world that's not related to human conflict, let's put it that way. This is a study done by the United Nations, the Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, which has since renamed itself to something I completely forget, but this was a study conducted over the time period 1995 to 2015, and about, let's say a third, slightly less than a third of the world's population at the time, whatever the world's population means, 1995 to 2015, was affected by floods at some point during that time period. And that accounts for about half of the natural disasters that were recorded during that time period. So this, if you want to look at technology so Google saw this statistic and said, okay, we want to look at technology. We want to look at problems that help us understand whether AI can be useful for natural hazard and climate mitigation type problems. And they said, well, floods is probably the one to start with because it's the biggest bubble on the screen. Next slide, please. On top of that, there was a study that came out also in the mid-2010s, early 2010s, that said that early warning systems are effective at reducing the cost of flood-related disasters. So there's some things that problems you can't solve. But with flood warnings, there are actions that humans can take and organizations can take, NGOs, multi-government organizations, governments, and human beings on the ground that mitigate the bad impacts from flooding. that might look like USAID or the World Food Program positioning food aid so that it can get to people either before or after a flood very quickly. It may look like telling people in the area that it's going to be flooded so that they can move their livestock or raise the food stores that they have in their house. So there are actions that people can take. And the World Bank estimated a cost-benefit ratio of about $9 for every $1 spent on providing early warnings across all natural disaster categories to people around the world. So this is how we got money from Google to do this problem. Next slide. And this is kind of what the technical challenge. So the challenge in predicting floods is a lack of data. So it's very easy to take old technology and predict a flood in places where you have historical data. That's let's call it a solved problem. That's an easy problem, right? You can build a model, you can run that model over any location where you have data, and you can get pretty good results, but you have to have data. So there's this sort of, it's a named problem in the field of hydrological sciences called prediction in ungauged basins. It was the decadal problem of the International Association of Hydrological Sciences from 2002 to 2013. It's an unsolved problem. And what it means is, how do you make predictions in locations where you don't have historical water data? And the answer is, okay, and the other thing I want to point out is what this slide is showing is a relationship between the GDP of a country and the total amount of streamflow data that a country has available in the United Nations public record. And there's a strong correlation. The correlation is something like 0.62, if I remember correctly. It's not on the slide. But and the GDP is a proxy for human risk of floods. Okay, so it's not a perfect proxy, but it's actually a pretty strong proxy. In countries with higher GDPs, higher GDP per capita, usually people have a smaller harm done to them when they experience a flood. In countries with lower GDPs, people typically have larger human cost when they experience a flood. That's not shown in this plot, but what's shown is that countries where people are more at risk to the human costs of flooding, that's like loss of livestock, loss of property, negative health outcomes, things like that, are typically the countries that also have the least amount of data, which makes it harder to predict floods. So this is where AI can help. Next slide. Okay, one more. So what we do is we take all of the United Nations streamflow data in the world and we train an AI model on all of it. And what that does is, so let's say you're living in Namibia, there's no data. It would be really, really hard for a civil engineering company to come into Namibia and set up a flood forecasting model that has acceptable accuracy. But what we can do is we can train an AI model on all of the data in the world, and we can learn sort of everything that is possible to learn. That's an exaggeration, but just for getting the intuition across, you can learn everything that there is to learn about streamflow hydrology using AI with one model trained on all of the global data, and then see what it tells you is happening in Namibia. That's the basic principle. So that's what we did. We gathered data from the World Meteorological Organization, from this organization called the Global Runoff Data Center, which is a UN organization also funded by World Wildlife Federation, and a bunch of other people that are not shown here. We took all of that data, trained a big model on it, and got some results. So just very quickly, I just want to go over what the model looks. Oh, by the way, when is my time done?
2 hours.
Oh, I only have 3 minutes. Okay, I want to skip this. Sorry. I want to skip this. I want to go to here. Yeah. So this is us comparing against the national models that are run in the United States, which are arguably the best flood forecasting models in the world, and we beat them by quite a lot. We offer more accurate flood forecasts than both of the U.S. national flood forecasting models. So this is a CDF plot. Sorry to get so technical, but you really want to have higher scores. This is a higher skill score for more of the locations that you test, right? So you want to be as far to this way as possible, and we're this yellow line. Our model is this yellow line. It predicts scores, median scores of about 0.75. These are R-squared scores, so just regular correlations, basically. It's about 50% of the locations in the United States, we get a score of about 0.75, which is very high. And to compare that to the U.S. National Water Model and the U.S. So there's two models that are run operationally in the United States. It doesn't matter, but there's a significant improvement even in places in the world where you have really good models already built. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry, one more thing. I'll just say the point here. This model here is run in the United States. It's our same AI model, but this one is run over places where there is no training data. So we take training data out of the training data set, and we use the model to predict in those locations. And so this is a proxy for the skill that you would get in places where you don't have historical data records. And it is still better in most places than the operational models in the United States. And these models require data in the place, or this model here requires data in the places that it makes predictions, and this model requires a lot of data at least close by to the places where we produce. So these three lines are kind of directly comparable, and this is what it would look like if you take our big global AI model and apply it in places with no data for training. So this is why we feel comfortable offering predictions over the entire continent of Africa, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to skip all this. No, more. A little bit more. Okay, this is the last thing I want to say. This is my philosophical outlook from a systems perspective of when I think AI might be useful for climate science type problems. This is I did not make this figure. I stole it from this book, computer science textbook from 1975, but I think it illustrates the point perfectly. Humans are really good at a few things. Has anyone ever heard of this thing called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics? It's a really famous math paper published in the, I think, 1950s, 1940s. And it talks about why are people so good at using math to predict things in the world? Because that was a time where that was really a promising field of study. But the reality is that there's only a few different types of domains where people are good at predicting things. One is where we can keep track of, this is complexity, so this is the number of actors in a system. This is randomness. Randomness is a proxy for information, so we have less information about a system, more information about a system. Simple systems, complex systems. And so think about Newton's laws, where we can actually write down the physics of a particular problem. We can make really, really good predictions when we can write down the physics of all the actors in the system, and we know all the, let's say, position and velocity of all the actors in the system. You get a three-body problem. The famous three-body problem is right on the edge of this, right on the edge of predictability from standard Newtonian physics. Of course, we can do much better with high-performance computing now, but that's sort of the intuition here. We have unorganized complexity. This is thermodynamics up here. So this is where we have a lot of complexity in the system, and we have a low amount of information in the system. Sorry, what that means is we have statistical properties like pressure and temperature, instead of things like the position and velocity of every molecule of air or every molecule of water in a thermal bath. Right? So we're really good at making predictions across systems of all kinds of complexity when we can rely on ergodic properties, when we can rely on averages, right? And we get theories like thermodynamics. We're really bad at certain, gotcha, thank you. Give you like 20 more seconds. We're really bad at making predictions of systems that live in the middle. These are things like macroeconomics, the three-body problem, and watersheds. Environmental systems live in this area here. And this is really where I expect AI to help us sort of push the boundaries of these limits of prediction. Thanks.
We can definitely discuss more later in the panel discussion. Our next speaker is Trevor Keenan. Trevor is the chief scientist at Earthshot Labs, a tenured professor at Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management at UC Berkeley. I believe we also have some students from Berkeley today. Let's welcome Trevor.
Thank you. Great to be here. Great to see you all. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. My name is Trevor. I'm Chief Scientist at Earthshot Labs and also a Professor of Climate and Climate Solutions at UC Berkeley. So I'm an academic, I admit it, but I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'm very, very interested in bringing science to the applied space to build solutions that can help society. And next slide, please. So I'm going to take a little step back and think a bit, and sorry about the hobbling around. If you haven't noticed, I have a big boot on my leg because I play soccer in my 40s, which is never a good idea. But anyway, I'm going to take a step back, figuratively, not literally, to think about the big picture of why, in a sense, we're here, or why climate tech is something of huge interest at the minute and growing interest. So what you see here on the left, I'm going to put my professor hat on, we've got time series of historical temperatures. And as you might notice from this graph, they're going up. That's interesting, we kind of knew that. But they're doing so quite dramatically recently. So just a few years ago, we had this big El Nino event, and there was a spike in global temperatures, and I and the rest of the scientific community were like, oh wow, it's getting really hot this year, that's terrible, but it'll cool down in the next few years because it's El Nino, it's a perturbation. Guess what, it didn't. And what did it do this year? Same thing, spiked again. Super, super radical change. Like, this is a really massive perturbation to the climate system that is only getting worse as time goes on. And we know a lot about why it's happening. And we also know a lot about how to deal with this problem. But it's a huge problem. So what do we got to do? And this is a similar depiction of ocean temperatures. So this is our global temperatures. The ocean, hot, off the charts. Just like really, really extreme. So, I don't know, I work as a professor of climate science, whatever. You'd think this would be very depressing. You get over it, it is, you get numb to it, but it's real. This is really, really real, and it's happening. And this is important for a few different reasons, but next slide, please. We know why it's happening, right? So this is historic CO2 in the atmosphere. It's been going up, no surprise to anybody. It's going up pretty continuously over time. I was born in 1980, it was 330 parts per million. It's now way over 400. That's a massive change in something we know heats the planet. And next slide, please. It's not going straight up, even though it looks here like it is in a sense, but this is emissions, that's concentration. So you see these dips, right? We had the global financial crisis, huge crash in economic activity globally, GDP plummeted everywhere, minor blip. COVID happened a few years ago. Anyone remember that? I don't. I blacked it out. But apparently it did. Everybody stopped going everywhere, right? Globally, internationally, everything. Minor dip. So this just goes to show how deeply embedded our CO2 use is in our whole system. We are really dependent on it. So this is why it's such a hard problem to fix. Next slide, please. But there's good news. That's the bad news, right? It's the motivation, but there's good news too. So, of everything we emit into the atmosphere, 70% of it is through emissions, about 30% is through deforestation primarily. So not all of it stays there. About 45% of it only ends up in the atmosphere. So only about half of what we put into the atmosphere stays there. This is really good news because it means CO2 in the atmosphere is not growing as fast as it otherwise would be. But it begs the interesting question, so where's the CO2 going? 30% is going directly into the land, and 25% is going into the oceans. So this is happening for different reasons, but the ultimate effect is that the land and the oceans are really, really slowing down the speed at which the climate is changing. If they weren't doing this, we would be at CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere we don't expect until 2060, currently. So this is a huge, huge service. And so now, I work a lot on the land carbon cycling specifically. So this is a video to demonstrate the importance of the land. If you didn't believe 30% is a number was all that important. Anybody know what the green is on this image? Anybody want to take a guess? This is a map of the world. Forests, yeah, close. It's vegetation. Actually, active vegetation. So you see at the bottom left, we're in January 1. Right, start of the year. It's winter in the northern hemisphere, summer in the south. So you don't see a lot of green in the northern hemisphere, but you do in the south because it's summer. And then we have these yellow-orange clouds. This is a harder question, but anybody have a guess what those might be? I'll say, sorry? Almost. But they're actually anomalies in atmospheric CO2. So this is how much CO2 is different from normal, from over the average year. And you'll see in the northern hemisphere, there's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere at this point of the year relative to the total year. So let's play the video. What we're going to do is move through the year, and you'll see all the CO2 build up, and then the plants green up, and effectively what they do is they take it all out. They take it all out of the atmosphere, only to later senesce in the winter and put a lot of it back in again. So this is the continuous breathing of the biosphere, where plants and microbes work together in ecosystems around the world to cycle CO2 out of the atmosphere and put a lot of it back in, but not all of it. They store a very large portion of it, and that's where that 30% is. So 30% of our emissions through this process gets effectively sucked into the land and stored as biomass or soils. Next slide, please. So this is super important because it's relatively constant, and it means that over time, you see emissions over time from the early 1900s, skyrocketing, of course, as we became more and more fossil fuel dependent and deforested more land. This is the land sink in yellow. So that 30% has been pretty consistent. As we emit more into the atmosphere, the land responds by taking out more. So next slide, please. So this is really interesting because it means, well, in part the land is coming to our rescue. It means that there's a lot of potential in the land. So can we think of ways to amplify that potential? If we could get that 30% up to 50%, that would hugely slow down climate change and really help with our efforts to lower or reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. But it's also a large risk, right? In California, fires. We heard a lot about flood impacts on the land surface, also ecosystems, right? That's a large store of carbon that's building that could go back into the atmosphere under conditions that were not favorable. Next slide, please. Okay, so the land is important. We know CO2 is important. We know climate is important, right? I hope we all agree on that. So this is the IPCC projections of what we need to do in the future to keep under 2 degrees. So this is the business as usual case, which is the most horrible name you can imagine to give something. This is the normal case, right? Of extreme climate change, extreme CO2 in the atmosphere. These are emissions on the y-axis and time up to 2100 on the left. To get below 2 degrees, so 2 degrees of warming, right? We're not there yet, but to stop going above 2 degrees, which is deemed to be this kind of catastrophic level where we're really, really changing the Earth system. By 2100, you need something called negative emissions technologies. So this means that no matter how much we cut our emissions, we're not going to get under 2 degrees unless we figure out ways to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And there are a few different ways to do that. Next slide, please. Either direct air capture or more effective land management, basically. So this is, I know it's a little like, oh no, what are we going to do, right? It's very daunting. You have a lot of climate doomerism in especially younger populations these days because it is so daunting. But actually there's this realization happening over time that I find really striking. It's not that temperatures can change in an isolated fashion and nothing else is affected except climate, right? We're all affected. And we are effectively one whole organism, right? We don't exist in a bubble. We don't exist, as much as we would like to believe sometimes, outside of nature or the climate system. We're intrinsically dependent on the environment around us. And society reacts to that as an organism, strangely enough. Or at least that's what we're seeing. So 10 years ago, nature-based climate solutions or doing anything to tackle the climate challenge was really not something talked about a lot. It was still debating whether it was a challenge, and you had like climate skeptics, etc. They're pretty quiet these days. And more over time, there's been this great realization growing across governments, corporations, academia, and at all levels of society, individuals, that we have to do something. And so on the right here is what you see which for me is really striking. This is academic publications focused on natural climate solutions and nature-based climate solutions. Nothing. It's not that long ago, right? Suddenly, it starts picking up. It's as if suddenly everybody said, wow, this is actually really important. We have to figure this out. We're going to do a lot of scientific research to figure out what the solutions are. And we're going to, from the academic perspective, solve it by publishing papers. That contributes, right? But also a lot of academics and a lot of people, entrepreneurs, starting companies to integrate that knowledge, to bring it to a solution space where we can actually build solutions that have impact. Next slide, please. So from a nature-based solution space where the biggest impact is, I really like this kind of framing from the Nature Conservancy of thinking about how can we protect the ecosystems that are on the planet. So you saw from an earlier slide, deforestation contributes about 30% of our emissions into the atmosphere. That's huge. If we could stop deforestation, that's a really easy lever to prevent a lot of emissions going into the atmosphere. Whilst also protecting biodiversity, ecosystem services, local communities, all of the added benefits you get from nature. Managing land better, we manage vast amounts of land around the world, obviously for food production and other purposes. If we can come up with improved management practices that effectively steward the land for other things than production, and that can have a huge impact. And also restoring the land. So there's a lot of degraded land around the world that has historically been actively used and very degraded through that use, that is no longer super productive and could be restored to its native state. Next slide, please. So it's quite fascinating because I showed you that chart of all of these academic publications that have started to come out, all of this academic interest. That's coming from government interest. Government funds most academic research, so a lot of government funding applying into this space. And then on the entrepreneurial space, you have all of these companies popping up. Like a whole ecosystem has grown around this concept of better stewardship of the land to address the climate crisis. And it's a real boundary rule. There's like a whole lot going on here, right? It's super complex, and so many different actors in the space, all trying to solve different pieces of the puzzle, trying to identify what the problems to solve for are, and then solve them. So super interesting. And I would say, for those of you who are thinking of maybe joining this group, right, starting your own company or joining a company, what I've noticed is there's a lot of machine learning going on here. There's a lot of like business savvy. There's very little science or actual understanding of how ecosystems work. So if you are thinking of starting something or joining something, please do check how deep is the knowledge, right? Or how much machine learning are they just thinking to throw at it and solve the problem automatically? I really liked what Gray mentioned earlier about transferability of information. It's super important. So why is this happening? Well, there's a huge growth in nature-based climate solutions. This is the total investment per project type for a variety of different climate solutions. So my area of interest, nature restoration and REDD+, these are the green bars, growing dramatically every year as companies realize that there are emissions that they have that are very difficult to cut, and that if they want to get to net zero, they need instead to invest in projects that take carbon out of the atmosphere and have co-benefits of community support, biodiversity, improved water quality, and all of our usual favorites, right? Next slide, please. And this is just the start. We are literally at the very start of this. As you saw from the academic publication thing, and I am an academic, I like to go back to it, but papers only started coming out on this topic since 2016. That wasn't that long ago. So we're here on the left in terms of projections for 2030. 2050, it's projected to be over a $1 trillion industry. So this is like huge expected growth. This is very exciting for many reasons, but the primary reason for me is that society is finally standing up and saying, we're willing to put money behind this. We're so committed to change the way society works in its relationship to nature and the environment in general. We're willing to put this amount of money behind it by this time. So this is based on corporate commitments. Next slide, please. So that's also what keeps me up at night and what drives my interest in Earthshot, which I haven't even gotten to yet. But how do we ensure the maximally efficient use of that capital? say society comes and says, okay, we want to put in $1 trillion a year. And we're like, great, go for it. And it's all wasted. That is the largest waste of a huge opportunity that society has ever had to change its relationship with the environment around it. So my main motivation in Earthshot, our main mission, is to how to effectively allocate that capital to projects that matter, to communities that need it, and ultimately to the benefit of the climate system and humanity as a whole. Next slide, please. So at Earthshot, what we do is we build tools to help streamline the process of developing carbon projects, carbon biodiversity, water health, all of the co-benefits. But if you are a land steward or an NGO in the world who has an agency over an area of land, but doesn't have financing to either restore it or protect it, which is the key things we want to do, or does the technical capacity to design better land management strategies, we are your partner in that. Using automated software, we do use machine learning, and we've designed a platform called LandOS that implements forest carbon modeling, risk assessments, and a lot of the things that you need to do in order to ultimately issue a credit for your projects, which can then be used to finance your projects. Next slide, please. So I'm out of time, I've been told. I'm happy to take questions from the panel, but thank you all for joining. I'm really happy to see you all here, and hope we can all think together how to make this ultimately a better planet.
Dr. Huiling Chang, Director of Strategic Marketing from BizLink Group. Dr. Huiling Chang has over 20 years of experience in marketing, market intelligence in areas of study including regional economics, data centers, industrial automation, and energy infrastructure. And she currently serves as a Director of Strategic Marketing at BizLink Group. Let's welcome Dr. Huiling.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me here. I look a little bit different from the photo. I just have my hair cut, but it's me, okay? Okay. So, first we hear great Trevor from academic, from government, from public, from entrepreneur perspective. Next page, please. So first, let me introduce myself. So lucky me, I have some experience in the academia area, public, in the government, and then right now in the private sector. So I think together today we can provide different perspective to discuss how we could help to provide a sustainable environment together. So let me quickly go to the next page. That photo, actually, I made it by myself. That's what I feel because I have been moved to the United States for 20 years. Previously, I moved from Houston to California 16 years ago. My memory, we usually just have around 1 week or so during the summertime that make me feel hot, which means the temperature is over 80 degrees or so. But suddenly, through recent years, quite often during the summertime, during the summer vacation, because the kids are at home, we need to go somewhere for vacation. When I turn on the TV, say, oh my God, the weather forecast, the American map, not just red, but purple color. I've never got a color in my mind. We have a purple color to describe the temperature. So even the Bay Area, we feel that the temperatures got even higher and higher. So that's echo to previous two speakers, your result, your finding. Really, this is a very serious situation. So today, I would like to share some experience from the private sector, what the companies are doing to echo the initiative to provide a sustainable environment together. So this is the agenda I'm going to share. I will start from the UN Sustainable Development Goals because that's quite important for the company to decide which criteria, which goals we want to make our effort. And then I will go to why it's important to integrate enterprises because it's not a binding rule, even though some governments start to have some initiative to, during the SEC filing, set some goal for company to disclose some criteria or some result, but that's another overall binding rule. But still, more and more companies, they want to take the initiative by themselves and guide themselves to regulate their supply chain. Why? So the second topic, I will talk about that a bit, and then the case study from Delta Electronics and also BizLink. Okay, let us start from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are total 17 goals here, and it started from the 2015. They want to use the data in 2015 and 15 years after to see we want to make some improvement or make some sustainable. These are the main goals. I have some larger legend, yes. So I put here some of the goals that strictly environment related. For example, the previous two speakers just mentioned about the climate, the life, or the water, life on land, or affordable clean energy related. This is more environment related goals. And then we have strictly social related goal, decent work and economic growth, no poverty, no hunger, good health and well-being, quality education. That's specific for social society related goals. And then for the governance, we want to have a peace, justice, and strong institution. And also we want to promote, we support the industry innovation and infrastructure. But there are some goals that combine social environment, for example, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and the communities. Some goals that are related to social and governance, gender equality, reduce inequality in the workspace, and also some involving environment and government together, responsible consumption and production. And the most important is the partnership for the goals. We need everyone, private sector, public sector, also the private sector together to work on this issue. So this is, we will use this as some idea how private companies, they set up their goals. So next slide, please. Why company, they will want to take this initiative? Because that takes effort. Private company usually will say we want to make profit, right? But take some actions and you need to have some cost, you need to spend some money. So I summarized the key ideas why the company want to do that. Of course, government guidance, that's the number one, but that's the most reason. Again, they want to improve business efficiency through the exercise. Do they want to lower the emission or drive the power efficiency, etc.? More and more companies, they're aware of the issue, so they take the initiative. But not only they do it by themselves, they also guide their supplier, their partner. So that's also why we will care that more and more, because you want to do business with Google, with Microsoft, they say, hey, you need to follow this guideline. You need to be the green supplier. Or the Apple, they just released new products, but many years ago, they already guide their suppliers, and you need to be 100% green enterprise. You need to show them the result. You need to see how the improvement you have been done. Otherwise, they will not approve you to be their approved vendor. So this is one of the reasons. And definitely, we want to attract more investors. This ESG issue has been getting more and more attention in the society. You want to do business or you want to invest in a company that has good reputation. They do good things for the environment, right? So all those things, and the last two, if you are an employee, definitely you want to be in the environment. You want to work with a good company. They respect you. They respect the environment. They give you no any discrimination. That's ESG related, and as well as, for example, when we talk about Delta Electronics, everybody will know. Oh, that's the company very working hard in the energy related issue. So that's kind of give the company the good reputation. And also can give good result to the company. Why? Because we want to hire employee, or we want to have a hiring. People want to go to this kind of company. Okay, so this is give you a quick overview why more and more companies want to do this. And let's start from Delta. Since I have 13 years working in the Delta Electronics Americas region, and pretty much we will follow corporate guideline in the ESG related topic. What's the goal corporate want to do? And down to each region, we will set the KPI. Previously, Lucky, great, you say you don't know KPI because you don't need to deal with this KPI. In the private sector, we always need to deal with KPI. We will have the goal corporate set to us. So among the the 7 goals corporate already set for the quality education, clean energy, and industry innovation, infrastructure. Pretty much, Delta is very dedicated in green energy. They have the business for energy infrastructure. Previously, we have solar panel, but right now we couldn't compete with Chinese company, and then we're back to do inverter. But still, we focus on energy storage. That pretty much want to help on this issue for the clean energy. When we generate the energy, how to restore the energy. And the founder, he has a very clear direction to the company. We want to set up the environment, not just we make money, but not just for us. When we make money, we want to have some contribution to the society. So in Delta, there's a slogan pretty much everybody will know that is smarter, greener together. We want to build smarter products, not just make money itself, but we kind of ask ourselves to continuing to drive the product efficiency, so that could decrease the emission, right? For example, the power supply, roughly average industry standard, maybe 96% efficiency, that would be good enough. But Delta, since it's the number 1 power supply in the world, average it, as I remember clearly, that would be 98%. And for the solar inverter, actually that dropped to 99%, 99.3% efficiency, I remember clearly, is the ratio. So this internally, we will have a committee annually. They will donate or sponsor some money for the engineering. Continue to encourage them to create new products to drive the efficiency. And most important of all, we will set the renewable 100 target. That's to echo the climate action. Nobody forced the private sector to say, hey, you need to do renewable 100. But since 5 years ago, Delta already said that. Next page, I could show you how we're gonna to make it. This is the simple org chart I grabbed from the ESG report from the company website. So from the top down, this is the stakeholders, mainly the every stakeholders related to ESG. So previously, one of the responsible is from the region ESG committee perspective. Corporate say in 2025, we want to have the at least renewable 80%. In 2030, we need to achieve 100%. It's not an easy goal for a manufacturing company because we have products, we generate product, and we not just a software company. How are we going to manage that? For example, in the region that I cover, we have 30 sites. I believe right now 32 sites already. How are they going to manage those electricity? So that's the daily thing. I spare some of time. I need to manage that. Some of the electricity, how we're going to decrease some of the electricity, how we're going to use different resources to offset that. So that's a pretty tough task. And next page, I could quickly show you the result. In the record shows the target for 2023, the whole global, we want to achieve renewable 65%, but actually the global results is 76%. In 2025, again, the goal is 80%, but quickly, I think maybe 2024 this year, we will meet. But still, meet, that's not the end, because continually, private sector is still to acquire company, right? We, again, need to match that. So this is a continually effort. And next case, I'm going to share BizLink. BizLink should use a different perspective in manage ESG. Left-hand side, the donut chart shows the stakeholder. BizLink from the bottom up. Among the stakeholders that matters to the business, including employee, customers, consumers, suppliers, medias, shareholders, or industry organization, NPO, and government. We have them join together and to pick the 17 goals you decided which goals you think most important to you. And then among the criteria we give them, they select the target. We use this metric, the significance of the operation impact, and also how important you think that matters to you, and have this something like we could say like a similar like KPI. So the things matters to the business and you care the most. That area will be the goals BizLink want to do. And then, next page, they will set a topic. Each topic will have action item among the climate, what you want to achieve. Set different topic, basically that's from bottom up. Everyone will think, oh, that's something we want to do. We want to together make some effort. And we will discuss to set the KPI, what's the result, how you're going to make it, how often. And here shows how frequently to discuss with the key stakeholders. So two companies use different methodology in managing ESG topic. And next page, please. So this is something shows the target and also the result. Pretty much the two companies, they both achieve their goal and also get more and more reputation in the society because this is just spontaneous initiative. So will be my last page. I know my time's up. So last page pretty much just share with you guys that from an ESG perspective, BizLink not just doing something to regulate the supply chain or do the products to lower the emission, but also we sponsor education to help them replace their equipment to better education environments for the kids, and also to sponsor some resources for the disaster repair and stuff. So this is my last presentation. So later in the panel discussion, we can talk more about the practice.
So now it's our panel discussion, and let me introduce our moderator, Kevin Koo. Kevin is the software engineering leader with a passion for the intersection of sustainability and technology. He currently works at Watershed, and he's the software engineering leader. Let's welcome Kevin.
Maybe I'll welcome our speakers front as well. Yeah, I think I'm the only person without a Ph.D. up here, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But thank you for the introduction, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, I'm currently working at a company called Watershed. We are a startup. We are offering a corporate sustainability platform. You actually saw our name on Trevor's slide towards the left-hand side. And I think that's why I'm especially passionate about our topic for panel today, talking about how we can mitigate the effects of climate change through technology and corporate action. We'll have 10 minutes to kind of go through some of the topics that I have prepared, and we'll open up to the floor in the last 10 minutes for any questions that you might have. So I guess to start us off, maybe you can talk about what you think are the roles that corporations can play in mitigating the effects of climate change.
Okay. Corporate, definitely the questions come to me. So in Delta Electronics, as I mentioned, they drive the product efficiency. So pretty much when you provide the product or you want to have the product go to market, you need to outstanding in some perspective. In Delta, the efficiency is the number one. And when we manage the emission from the corporate, they manage like, maybe you guys could see some news from the newspaper. Delta will charge 300 per ton the carbon tax to the business group. In 2020, each business group, based on their emission data, okay, you want to achieve a certain of the business, how much you have been generated the emission based on your products. So they have the goal. And business group, they will set a goal, how to lower the emission. How are we going to make that? You need to have your product to be more efficient. That's number one. And you need to try to eliminate unnecessary waste. That's the number two. With that regulation, corporate set to each business group and adding the penalty. One, if you're over the budget, 1 ton the emission, you'll be charged 300. So I see the record in 2023. They compare with 2022. Some businesses, because we just start to have that initiative, charge totally 1 billion. That's actually 1/10 of the Delta's revenue a year. So that money doesn't come to employees' pocket as a bonus or something. No, they use the money, 1/4 of the money they use to improve the facility. Say if you have you don't have the LED lighting, they change it to LED lighting, and also change some equipment. Some of the funding they go to support more projects in the universities, like the sponsors to the lab or some sponsors some projects. Wish to have academia, they have new technology can feedback to corporate, so generate more efficient the products. That's one way. And also take one example in BizLink. Right now, our speaker mentioned about AI. In private sector, we use AI as well. We start to adopt that concept in the manufacturing. Previously, when we got a RFI or something, we need to have a lot of engineering to do some pair run testing and continue the testing. That kind of consume energy, will cause some emission. So right now they use AI to do some modeling. So that will not only save energy, but also more efficient, right? And also, like in the testing or in the manufacturing, their assembly set. Previously, they will use manpower to maybe look into the monitor to detect the error. But right now, they put historical. When I visit one of our factory in the Asia this summer, they used over 10,000 record in the history they could get, and put in the system, use AI to already give you some scenario and narrow down, tell you which area might be the most priority will get error. So the technician easily could figure out where could be the problem. So there's also some of the area that corporate is doing, trying to, based on our capability, to trying to do some effort.
Got it. And actually, now that you mentioned AI, I'm curious, Gray or Trevor, what are some of the hurdles that you guys run into in kind of adopting or like pushing out some of the technology-based solutions that you guys have worked on?
Yeah. So speaking from the perspective of what you just saw, where we work with human-centric issues that are often in the domain of governments, often things that governments care a lot about. One of the challenges that we see is the biggest challenge, easily bigger than any engineering challenge, is trust in AI, right? So people are used to thinking about the world in a particular way, thinking through problems in a particular way. For going back to floods in particular, there are government organizations that are responsible sometimes, in most of the world, for providing this kind of information to people, and they hire experts. And those experts are used to thinking about problems in a certain way. And so our biggest job is to help people understand what AI is doing, understand why it's useful, and understand the real advantages rather than sort of the hyped advantages that it can offer.
Yeah, I would add, I guess, AI is obviously revolutionizing how we do a lot of things and how we develop products that are of great utility to a lot of the work that we do. And that said, so in Earthshot we work with a lot of AI products that are kind of developed by academic institutes or other groups. And what we consistently and universally find is that they're globally good, locally terrible. So it's a classic machine learning problem where you capture the central tendency of the data, but the outliers and nuances are really, really hard to get, and you need to really learn those. And if you don't implement your AI system in a way that it has embedded knowledge that helps it learn, it's really hard to extrapolate. So for us, we've had to tailor build human-in-the-loop machine learning systems that allow us to localize other machine learning, like you can think of them as foundation models, to local actual sites, characteristics, and information. And this is essential. Basically, long story short, off the shelf, no good. You really have to localize the information.
So on the topic of localization, I'm curious, are there examples of successful collaborations between the private sector, academia, and government on kind of helping to localize these technology solutions?
Sure. And yeah, so I think, yes, for sure. I think the localization is a kind of the end step after a long process of generating the system or product for a lot of the use cases we experience. So I'm sure in Google's situation where you're doing short-term weather forecasting or flood forecasting, it's very different because you have a lot of local context that's relevant. But for us, for example, we need to know what's on the land surface. Is it a crop, and what kind of crop is it? You need local knowledge to actually identify that. So we talk a lot, there's a lot of talk about like integrating indigenous and local knowledge into the systems that we build to avoid a kind of parachute science approach where we're coming in and saying, hey, this is what's happening here, and the locals are like, what are you talking about? That's not a crop, that's a forest. But having local information to help basically localize things really helps. So a success we've had in that is this human loop system where we take products that are generated through government and academic collaborations, and then we tailor them effectively using local knowledge to the local conditions.
Actually, one thing to add to that, sorry about what you were talking about. One of the things that we've noticed working in the with governments is that governments oftentimes, at least in the sector that I work in, have less room for risk. I don't even say less appetite. We talk to government agencies all the time that wish that they could take more risks, but because they have certain mandates and certain populations to serve, we're able to take risks that they aren't. And so one of the things that I see that AI can do in a sector that's sort of dominated by government regulation, like where some of the dominant motivations are government regulations and some of the outcomes are really population level outcomes, is taking on some of the high risk R&D. So that's what we're doing, and I think that's a great role for companies to play in this sector.
Got it. And I think we talk a bit about how governments and the local knowledge can help us build these technology solutions. But what are some of the ways in which we can effectively reach these local communities once we have these solutions? How do we deploy it to them?
Good question. Good question, yeah. So obviously making information available to local communities is one of our ultimate objectives, to lowering the power differential and the ability of those very informed to ultimately exploit poorly informed stewards of the land. And so to do so, we've built a system platform where people can access it remotely and update information. The ultimate goal is for that information to be assimilated into the system so they are tailoring the information to their own needs and their own local conditions. But I think, web hosting, that's a long road though. Particularly if you want to scale globally because local needs are so locally specific.
On that note, earlier this year I went to visit some farms in some of the areas that we saw that were flooding on the map, and this is an anecdote, but hopefully there's some larger point here, that one of the things that someone told me, I was visiting their farm, which was 1 acre of corn, and that would be the entire economic income for a family. This person said, I give 1 liter of fertilizer a year to put on my crops, and if I put it on the day before it rains, then it's gone, and that's it. And that's, I can't buy it. I get no more fertilizer. So if you could just give me a 1 day ahead rainfall forecast, that didn't require a smartphone, this would change how I do my entire annual business, the entire annual income, the way I think about it would change. And we take these kind of things for granted. And so that sort of anecdote stuck with me because it was so powerful, but also because it just showed me sort of the range of differing needs for types of solutions. So if something we just set up, things that we take for granted can have a huge impact in other places. And so I think this answer is very different depending on where you are.
I think I saw a sign that my 10 minutes was up, so we'd love to open up to the floor and see if there's any questions.
And that we need to take forest and protection and all that. Do that need to be addressed in a local level? That's my question.
That's a really good question. I can see how you have that understanding of like you've got a big bunch of CO2 here is affecting the local environment significantly. Fortunately, for better or worse, the global atmosphere is really well mixed. So a molecule of CO2 is quite quickly moved around and homogenized. So the anomalies you saw there are a few parts per million on a background of 400 parts per million. So they're relatively small compared to the whole concentration of the atmosphere, which is pretty uniform and well mixed. There are strong seasonal cycles in wherever there's vegetation, really, and seasonality in climate. So in the northern hemisphere, you get very low CO2, high CO2 in summer and low in winter, as you saw there. And they're on the order of 20 parts per million or so. So not insignificant. But the local radiative forcing from those, because everything's quite well mixed, probably doesn't lead to strong local heating. But the second part of your question was whether we need to have localized efforts to use the land in a way that will reduce CO2 loads. That's definitely true, for sure, because different places have different potential. They have different use histories, so there's a lot of potential, for example, in tropical regions, because basically plants grow very well and take up a lot of CO2, and in other regions for different reasons.
Hi, this is also for Trevor. Thanks for your great presentation and I guess emphasis on the science of the field, which I guess as a corporate potential buyer of carbon offsets, especially forestry, that's huge for us given all the scandals. I guess I'd be curious, given your focus on science and maybe optimizing the math behind it, do you all also have similar approaches or products or focus on maybe the additionality and other aspects that have kind of plagued forestry offsets? Like, for example, I can imagine I've worked with this SBTI organization for setting net zero goals, and there's not much AI. It's pretty simple, but even they've been rocked by scandals. So how are we supposed to trust that gold standard Rivera can peer in your black box and improve it and really understand what's going on, and then actually trace the right maps, engage the right stakeholders, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really our reason to be, basically, is bringing rigor to this market that has lacked rigor for many decades now. And so you referenced these scandals over the past few years. There's been a lot of publicity around projects that failed to deliver, particularly conservation projects, so the protection of land that ultimately didn't end up being protected or wasn't in danger in the first place. And a lot of this comes from, as I showed in that map of all the actors in the space, there has historically been very little actual science used in this space. So it's not like taking machine learning or not or any of that. It's really just like, are you implementing approaches that reflect the understanding of how ecosystems work? And in the majority of historic cases, unfortunately, the answer has been no. We're drawing straight lines between dots, basically. It's like not an exaggeration. So what we aim to do is to bring that science and rigor to that space to provide quantification of the potential and risks associated with projects and benchmarking and leakage and everything that's required to the highest standard possible. There's uncertainty, of course, but we feel that by bringing the best available science to the table, that's ultimately the solution to doing it.
Question.
Question for Dr. Chang. So you had 2 case studies for companies that were had a strong emphasis on ESG. And how does that translate to the corporate culture inside? You mentioned like kind of top-down models of governance, but bottoms up, like how did that impact like employee retention or like employee performance?
I think from the top-down approach, pretty much your boss set a KPI over there. For example, the region renewable achievement rate that accounts for America's region 5% KPI. You make it, you take it. You didn't make it, you lose it 5%. That translates to employees' pocket because that will impact our bonus. That everybody take it very seriously. In BizLink, that's from bottom of the different approach. Almost every week, I will receive message or email from top management. They will encourage something, or they share some perspective that they attend some meeting. What's the thought they have? What's the impact we should be aware? What's the action he wants the employees to together make the change? They use the communication very frequently. So everybody very buy-in manager their direction pretty much, because throughout the very, I could say, very comprehensive communication through email, through video. They take, you couldn't attend a meeting, they send you email, they send you the video, so you know what's going on, what's the corporate direction, what's the goal we want to do together. So kind of you will have some share the same value with the management. So the different approach. But since Delta use top-down approach, but the goal is pretty much it has a common agreed goal, so no that much obligation over there. Just will have some conflict. For example, they want to charge you the combo fee. At first, the business head, they will be suffer very much. So since they were unwilling to do that, but since boss is boss, the rest is there, 5% KPIs there, everybody still need to make it. Two different approach. I think that depends on company's cultural difference. Yeah, I couldn't say which one is better, which one is bad, but get more and more employee buy-in. That will be more. I think could contribute more to the goal, to sustainable goal, because the goal couldn't just be made by, for example, I share not by UN or by government or by private sector. They really need to down to everybody. For example, later we will have someone to share the good technology to apply to our daily life could use. It's kind of example as well. Any other question?
Thanks for the next talk. There are quite a few technologies that can fight climate change. For example, say the solar, the wind energy, and the hydrogen, for example. But there are quite a few failure cases, say, for example, in the hydrogen, especially, that there were hydrogen trends in Germany, but then it stopped because the hydrogen supply, something like that. So for this kind of technology to be implemented, that we can fight the climate change issue, what does it take to have this kind of technology to be implemented in a larger scale, and to avoid the failure of those implementation of the technology? Can you comment on those? Yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess failure is a necessary evil of an emerging space, and like startups, most fail, and most ideas are done at being great ones, but there are some that rise to the top, and we're, I guess, in that process of figuring out what are the solutions that will really work. But I'm very, very convinced that if there's no one solution, it's going to be a whole raft of solutions. It's transformation of society fundamentally and how we do things, and that needs a lot of different things to change. But what's needed for something to really work? I can talk about the nature space, and really what we see is it's a very nascent market, and what's really moving the needle are trailblazers. And there was a question earlier, our first question, I think, about what corporations can do, and I'm seeing this very clearly where you have either a single corporation like Microsoft who's going out and buying all the high quality credits they can find, or investing in all the high quality projects, in having their own internal diligence process to identify what is what works in this market, and then we identify it, then we're going to invest in it. And the other is coalitions of very different corporates coming together, because you can't all be Microsofts, right? You can't all just like throw $1 gazillion at this and move the needle. But through banding together, smaller entities have been really successful in really blazing the trail and showing how the market should be. So basically, engage in the market that you want to see in the future, and then the market coalesces around that, and it becomes the market of the future.
One last question.
Oh, thank you. So I have one question, which is the easy one for Gray, and a harder one for Trevor. So the easy one for Gray is I'm just wondering what's the purpose of Google to to deal with the flawed issue, and what's the is there any milestone and any budget constraint? I'm very curious about that. And for the question for Trevor is, as we know that like Janet Yellen just openly support voluntary carbon market in I think it's like May 28 or something. So I'm just wondering, since this market has long been administered by NGOs like Vera or Gold Standard, how do you think that assuming that government really want to support this market, what's the possible measures? Thank you.
So it's actually a really good question, and I think there's some general sort of extrapolation we can do from my very specific answer. So I'm very happy to have the question. So Google's in a unique position, even in industry, in that they just are very large. So that's true, but I think a lot of the lessons do translate in some sense. So Google, what does Google want out of investing in climate research and understanding what it's a few things. One is what I said earlier, that people want information about natural hazards, which are related to climate. But it's more than that. There's really two motivations. One is good publicity, and I think that's a great thing for. I think we get news articles about all of our successes in the climate space. I don't know that I'm allowed to share numbers, but the numbers are quite high for what it would have cost to get that kind of news coverage. Surprisingly high, and that's really cool. And it's also cool not just for Google, but I think it's really neat when I read stories in the news about companies that are sort of investing in climate and advertising how green they are. Okay, it's a lot of what we call that, virtue signaling or whatever, but at the same time, what it's doing is keeping the message in the news and keeping it in people's minds and giving people an option to choose companies that sort of invest in this kind of thing and companies that don't. So I think that's pretty cool. I think if I were to summarize that in one sort of statement, I said this to someone earlier, but my father was a climate scientist. I'm a climate scientist, and I kind of grew up in this sort of area for a long time, and I felt for years the frustration in the science community, and maybe you agree or disagree, I don't know, is that we know a lot more about climate than people are willing to act on. And it's really exciting to me to see this sort of, I would consider it kind of new, or at least very rapidly growing effort to figure out ways to build businesses around this. In my personal opinion, is that this is going to be the transformative point in this sort of history of climate science.
Government, eh? Government's very complex, obviously. Testing. Thank you. Yeah, government's super complex. So it works in its own ways, and the impacts of government decisions trickle down in various different ways. So there was that White House policy statement a few months ago on the voluntary carbon markets and explicitly supporting them. So that was super interesting. And you're like, okay, so what does that mean? But then it gives agencies agency to release funds to support a variety of different activities. Actually went to the White House a month afterwards for the inaugural workshop of what do we do now kind of thing that they hosted, the Office of Science, Technology and Policy. And the things that emerged from that were, okay, we're going to greenlight funding for academic research in various different ways. We're going to allocate funds to landowners, basically through the USDA and the US Forest Service, to enact climate smart commodity practices and ultimately develop a label for a climate smart commodity. So now you can buy organic food, right? It has the label, it's organic, etc. A similar label for produce that's grown in a climate smart way. So that's coming. And these are direct impacts that have been, it's not like that happened. There hasn't been a pivot. It's something that's been growing over time, and it's just becoming more and more apparent. And now the government is willing to step up and say, hey, we declare our support for this openly. Now, of course, an election is coming in a few months, about 1 month. Lord. Things change, they ebb and flow, but ultimately the trajectory is straight up and to the right. And we've seen very little evidence over the past few years or decade that any government change can really affect that in a major way. So it's great to have the government on board, it's great to have people on board, corporates, everybody, and I agree, this is a time of fundamental change, and we got to make the most of it to make sure that change is good.